How you doing? I'm Kenny Joya. Welcome to another one of my tutorials. In this video, we're going to mix a jazz fusion song from beginning to end. We have a session in front of us. Let's see what we have here. We have 4 live drum tracks, a kick track, a snare track, a pair of overheads, and a room mic. A bass track, a guitar rhythm track, another guitar track, a sax, a guitar solo track, some stereo guitar chords, and a Fender Rhodes. Let's see what it sounds like now with just the faders up. As you can tell, it's pretty rough, but when it's done, it's going to sound like this. That's a whole lot better. It's a lot cleaner, clearer, and much more interesting to listen to. Now, although we're going to mix this song in Pro Tools, this is not a Pro Tools specific tutorial. Much of what we're going to be doing can be done in any DAW, using the same or similar plugins. So don't feel that you need to use all the exact same tools that I'm going to be using. You don't. It's the concepts and how we use them that really matter here. So let's go back and see how we got to this finished mix. Let's go. Now the next thing I want to do is organize our session. Now this is important, and I'm going to mention this a lot, is that one of the best ways of getting a great mix is mixing quickly. This way you can focus on what jumps out at you the most. Instead of getting lost on minor details, you could hear what other people are going to hear when they hear the song for the first time. So mixing quickly is very important. And one of the parts of that is organizing our session. This way we can see very quickly what everything is doing. So let's start by organizing our session. And the first way to do that is by renaming our tracks names that make more sense to us. Just because it makes sense to the producer or the engineer that recorded this song, we don't necessarily need all that detail. So starting with track names, you see our kick track is named Kick Take 4. For mixing purposes, we don't really care about take 4. This is the take we're going to use. So to see the name of the track very quickly, we want to keep this as short and concise as possible. So let's rename this track Kick. It's a lot easier to see what's going on. And the same thing for the snare. Sometimes engineers will put the take on there or the mic they used. We don't need that for mixing. Next we have the overheads. We could just name it overheads. And the room mic. Next we have the bass. Now the bass is recorded direct, but it's the only bass track we have. So for now, we can just call it bass. Then we have a guitar rhythm track, which again is take 4. We don't need that. Our guitar head, which is take 7. Let's get rid of that. Our sax, just call it sax. And our solo, guitar chords, and our Fender Rhodes, which we know is a Fender Rhodes, so let's just call it Rhodes. So now we can quickly see what's on each track. Kick, snare, overheads, room, bass, guitar rhythm, guitar head, sax, solo, chords, and Rhodes. So at a quick glance, we know what's going on. Now in addition to doing this, we should put our tracks in the order that make the most sense to us. The drums are pretty good, kick, snare, overheads, and room. And the bass, but what I can do with the rest of the tracks is order them based on when they come in the song. This way we can work from beginning to end, getting each track to sound good in the mix. So like these chords here, they come before the solo. So let's move it here. And the Rhodes track starts earlier in the song. So let's bring it up, just past the bass track. So now we have our Rhodes here, the guitar rhythm that plays in the beginning. Then our guitar head and our sax, which play at the same time. Then our guitar chords, then the solo. So again, makes it easy to mix when our tracks are in order of when they come in, and also based on what they play. We wouldn't put guitar tracks all over the session, but this will be a time saver as we work from beginning to end. The next thing we could do is color our tracks. Again, so we can quickly see what they're playing. So we'll start with our drums. Go to colors. And let's choose a color for our drums. Let's choose this one here. Now it doesn't really matter what we choose, as long as it makes sense to us and it stands out as being different from the other tracks. So for bass, let's choose blue. Or Rhodes, we'll do some kind of pink or magenta. The guitars right here, let's give them no color, so the dark gray. The sax will make red, and the chords will make gray as well. And our solo we'll make cyan, so it stands out what each track is doing. So at a quick glance, we know these are the drums, our bass, the Rhodes, some guitars, our sax, and our solo. It all gets us closer to mixing as quick as possible. The next thing I like to do is clean up our tracks. There's a lot of empty space over here where the tracks aren't playing. These tracks were all consolidated, so they all started at the same spot and ended at the same spot as well. But for our purposes, that's a waste of space. Our hard drive is working harder than necessary, and it's also harder to see when each track is playing. By cutting it up or trimming these clips, it'll be clearer for us when they play or don't play. So let's start with the drums. Let's make the height of the waveforms as tall as possible. If you hold down Option on the Mac, Alt on the PC, and right drag to the right or the left, it makes the waveforms as tall as possible. So let's do this for now. Zoom in and get rid of the drums up until where they come in, which is right about here. Do the same at the end, which is about here. This isn't destructive, so if we're cutting it off, we can always bring it back in. But by bringing the waveform as high as possible, I'm sure that we're not. Let's do our bass. Same thing. If you're using Pro Tools and Command Focus is turned on, we could just hit A and it trims the beginning. And for the end, hit S and it trims the end, as long as Command Focus over here is turned on. To the Rhodes. Now I'm not going to clean up every Rhodes hit. That's going to take too long. Just the beginning and end, and any big spots where it's not playing. But that's not really the case. Rhythm starts here. Let's cut from here to here, and from here to the end, hit S. The guitar head and sax play together. So we'll cut here. Guitar head stops over here. Hit S. And then our sax stops here to here. And then at the end. Chords stop here. They don't start till here. And then from here to here. And the solo only plays here. So we'll start here to here. And to trim it, hit Command T on the Mac or Control T on the PC. And that trims it. So now, Option A on the Mac or Alt A on the PC brings it back out and it looks like this. It's a little less work on our hard drive, but more importantly, we can see where each track is playing. Rhythm isn't playing here, guitar head's not playing here, and the sax, solo comes in here. So it saves us a bit of time knowing when tracks are playing and when they're not. This session is not that big, so it's not as big of a deal, but with bigger sessions, it becomes even more important. But I still do it with these sessions with less tracks. It's still worth it, because at a glance, I can see when they're playing, and jump right to those sections. Here's the solo, the chords, the sax, the guitar rhythm. Again, it saves a bunch of time. And finally, let's add some markers. This way we can quickly jump from section to section. So the song starts here. Let's make a marker. Now we haven't found the song's tempo yet, which is okay. We'll do that later. So for now, we're using minutes and seconds as our time frame. So if we change our tempo later, the markers are not going to move. So hit Enter and name this Intro. I want that to have colors, so I'm going to go to Preferences and choose Always Display Marker Colors. Choose that, and now our marker has a color. And the band comes in here, band enters, and here's the melody, melody 1, melody 2, now this is an alternate section. Let's put a marker there. Alternate 1. Then we have a solo. That's another alternate section. Here's the outro. And finally, the ending. Zoom out, and we can see the whole song at a glance. Our intro, the band enters, melody 1, melody 2, the alternate, the solo, the next alternate, the outro, and the ending. So again, it all leads us down the path of mixing quicker. So that's pretty much it for organizing our session. I think it's pretty organized. Let's move on and create a rough mix. Let's go. The next thing I want to do is get a good, quick, rough mix. Again, we want to do it quickly to keep our ears fresh and to hear things how a new listener might be hearing them. Let's open the mixer and let's hear a bit of it. Now, the first thing I'm noticing is the mix overall sounds a bit dark. Now, usually we go back and fix track by track to get our EQ or our frequencies to sound right. But that takes a little more time, and you can spend 3 or 4 hours on that and lose focus. Again, we want to do this quickly. So because the mix is overall dark, let's put an EQ on the master bus fader. I have one here in Pro Tools already. So all the tracks are going here. So anything we do here on the inserts is going to affect all the tracks at once. So let's add an EQ here and see if we can't get the mix to sound better with just one EQ. We'll try adding a high shelving. Notice right away, it sounds a lot better. Before and after. Now let's see if we can't get rid of some of the mud in the lower mid-range. Sounds a lot better. Now typically, this is pretty unconventional, to start off by EQing the 2-bus, but you can see how useful it is, because very quickly, the mix sounds a lot more balanced, at least in the EQ. So instead of working track by track, we could work backwards from this EQ, by readjusting this EQ on each individual track, but starting with it on the master. Now another thing I like to do on the master fader is add a bit of compression, just so the mix glues together a bit. So let's try adding a compressor after this EQ. I'm going to use the channel strip by Metric Halo. It's one of my favorite stereo compressors. And we're just going to use it to compress. So don't worry about the EQ or the gate. We're just going to go over here to a compressor, adjust the threshold right here at a ratio of 3.6 to 1, which is a decent amount, an attack of 144 milliseconds, and release of about 121 milliseconds. So it's a fairly quick release. So it's going to respond pretty quickly. Let's hear it. Notice how punchy it sounds right away? But that's way too much. Let's just use a little bit of this. Before, notice it sounds a bit loose. It's not really cohesive. And then with it back on, it's a bit tighter. So let's go with this, and we can readjust it as we're mixing. Now another thing I want to add to the Master 2 bus is a multi-band compressor. This one is also by Metric Halo. And right now, it's set very subtly. It divides the signal into 3 separate bands, which we could change: low, mid, and high. Right now the lows are 100 Hz and below. The mids are between 100 Hz and 5 kHz, and the highs are 5 kHz and above. What this does, you don't really hear the compression happening, but it tightens up each frequency separately from each other. So it sounds more subtle, but it tightens things up. Let's hear it. Before, to hear it more extreme, we could adjust the highs You still hear the compression, but each frequency is compressing separately. Low, mids, and highs, so it sounds more subtle. But let's put this back so we don't hear the effect too much. Before, notice how it tightens up the low end and also makes the top end a lot more even. Another thing I like about this compressor is the limiter. Over here, we're not using it right now. But if we did, it could be very dramatic. So we might play with this a bit later, or use this on some of the individual tracks, but for now, let's leave it off so the effect on the 2-bus is a bit more subtle. So that's pretty good. Now let's hear all the effects turned off versus on to see if we made it better. Off. That's a lot better. In fact, it sounds a little too bright. Let's go back to our EQ. And let's add a little less EQ to the top end. That's better. Before, after. It's pretty dramatic. And again, the purpose of this is to adjust the frequencies of the entire mix right at the beginning, before we even start mixing. So we have a good overall sonic picture of what the mix should sound like. Everything after this is fine-tuning. If we did it the other way, we could spend 3 or 4 hours in this mix, come back and listen to it and go, the mix is too bright or too dark. We lost our focus. By focusing quickly on the overall sound right at the beginning, we get it pretty close, and then we can fine-tune later on without losing our way. So now let's dig in deeper and get a better rough mix. We'll turn off everything but the drums. Notice we panned the guitar head and the saxophone away from each other, because they're both playing the lead melody, just to give them their own space. Let's solo that. it just sounds wider, and we can hear each instrument in the melody a bit more separately, because they have their own space. Let's check out the beginning guitar, right here. That sounds a lot better. It's a pretty good rough mix. And we can listen to it a couple of times all the way through to really get an idea what this track is doing, what's working and what's not working, what moves us and what doesn't. By putting effects on the master bus, we got to this point much sooner. Now everything from here is just fine tuning. So that's our rough mix. Let's move on to the drums. Next, we're going to start getting some drum sounds. But before we do that, let's go back to the mixer. And if you remember, we added this EQ to the master bus in the last video. This makes the mix sound brighter and more finished. But leaving it on the master bus isn't really going to help us, because everything we do going forward on the individual tracks is going to fight it. So to create the same effect, but without tying our hands, let's take it off the master 2 bus and instead put it on each of these tracks. It'll sound exactly the same. It's just an EQ, but it gives us more flexibility when we tweak each track to use more or less of the effect, or not at all. So let's take it off of here. I'm actually going to copy it by holding out Option on the Mac, Alt on the PC, and just drag it to an individual track. And put it there as well. Let's do the same with this one, and our sax, the guitars, the Rhodes, our bass track, and our drums. So now, bypassing this one should sound exactly the same as bypassing all of them and leaving this one on. Let's hear it. And it does. So now we can get rid of this one. We have the same thing with more flexibility. So let's mute everything except for the drums. And let's get a rough balance for the drums. Start with that kick. Somewhere about there. And let's start off with the overheads. Let's solo it. Now let's notice what the overheads are doing. With a little rough mix, the overheads are adding the top end, the stereo-ness, or how wide the drums are, and basically how pretty or bright the cymbals are. Without it, and with. So basically, we want this track to be pretty bright. So let's go to our EQ and adjust it just for the overheads. I don't think we need this. Let's work on the top end. This one here is the Q. Decides how sharp the EQ is. It's a little sharper. And this is a bit more subtle. Now that sounds pretty bright by itself, but in the track, mixed with the other drums, I think it's going to work like this. Let's hear it. That feels pretty good like that. It's nice and bright and pretty, but it's not overwhelming or harsh sounding. Now, if you notice, I'm not going to compress the overheads. I'm not a big fan of doing that. It makes them pump too much, where you hear the effect. I prefer the overheads to sound natural, especially in a song like this. We'll probably compress the other tracks, but the overheads aren't going to really need it. So let's leave the overheads like this for now, and let's move on. Next, we're going to work on the room mic. Let's start off by hearing it. Now we can tell it's not a very big room. It's a good sounding room, but it's not huge. But we still want to use this mic to make the room sound live and ambient. So this mic has a purpose. Let's hear what the mix we have now on the drums and see what it adds. It adds some nice ambience. Let's try to accentuate that. Let's solo it, and let's start out with the EQ we have now, which used to be on the Master 2 bus. Let's see how we want to adjust it. We'll start with the low end. It's cutting some mud. Let's see if that's necessary on this mic. I don't think so. I kind of like that frequency, the lower mid-range, on this mic. Makes the room sound deeper. So let's get rid of this, and let's readjust the top end. Not sure we need this much. That seems more like it. Just a little bit of shelving at about 3 kHz, adding just under about 3 dB of gain, just to make it sound a little prettier. But the overheads will do most of that. Bypass it. Just makes it a bit clearer. Now let's check out the low end and see if we want to boost that a bit. I'm not sure we need it. Let's hear it with the other drums in, though. I think it's pretty good without. So let's turn this off as well. So this EQ feels pretty good. Let's add some compression to it. In fact, let's use the limiting trick I mentioned earlier that's on the 2 bus over here. Let's add some of that to this track. The Metric Halo multiband compressor. I have a preset here called Room Start. It basically takes each band and limits them by a decent amount. Let's hear it. It basically makes it sound more live. But to really perform some magic, let's go over here to the limiter. This is where we can really make it sound squashed. Before, the volumes are too different, so let's adjust the output. Notice how much more alive that sounds. It really brings out the liveliness and the ambience from the room. Let's hear it against the overheads. That sounds pretty good. Now at this point, we should check out the phase or polarity of the room mic against the overheads. Let's go to our EQ, and right here is a button for flipping the polarity or the phase of that mic, so we can see how the room mic combines with the overheads and make sure we're not hearing any cancellation. It sounds a bit deeper when it's inverted. Before, the kick sounds bigger and deeper when the room mic is inverted. So let's leave it like this. Now we might change this later when we're dealing with the close mics, the kick and snare, but right now it sounds better this way. Let's hear it with the close mics. That's feeling pretty good. It's very live and ambient, and the room track has a purpose. So let's move on to the close mics. Next, we're going to work on the kick drum. Let's hear it. Let's start off by making it sound more even by controlling the level by using a compressor. I'm going to choose the Pro compressor by Avid, but for this kind of thing, almost any compressor will work. I'm going to try to keep it subtle, not looking to smash it or bring out the attack too much. Just want to control the level to make it sound more even. I'm going to choose average as the type, which tends to be a bit smoother. We'll use a 3-to-1. Let's see what it sounds like. Just a few dB of attenuation. Let's adjust the attack. Now if we make this too slow, the transients of the kick will get through too much. We won't really be doing much. If we make it too quick, it'll be grabbing everything and make it sound too squashed. So about here feels pretty good. Now for the release, we want to make it kind of quick, so it snaps back between each hit, but again, not too quick, where it starts to sound squashed. About there feels pretty good. Bypass it. Just controls it a bit more, but also brings out the attack, so it's not so mushy. Let's hear it in the track. That feels pretty good. Now let's adjust the EQ. And remember, this is the EQ that used to be on the master fader. We probably don't want to add a shelving to it. That's a bit too bright. There's not much frequency information that high. So we'll get rid of this and use a peak EQ or parametric EQ instead. Let's get rid of this for now. And let's boost this one. About there. It brings out the attack, or the beater, a bit more. Again, let's hear it in the track. In addition to this, we could add some more low end, so the kick sounds bigger. We'll use a low end shelving, right here. Right about there feels good. Let's hear that in the track. Bypass it. It definitely sticks out more and punches through. So now I want to try another trick to adding low end to kick drums. We could do it by adding a tone to the kick drum that only cuts through when the kick hits. So let's make a new track. We'll make a mono audio track. And we'll name it Tone. And let's add a signal generator to this track. Let's bring the frequency way down to about 50 hertz. Let's bring the gain up a bit, and let's hear this tone. It's pretty deep sounding. If your speakers don't go down that far, you might not even hear it. But it'll make this kick drum sound deeper, especially if the kick doesn't have much low end to begin with. But the way to trigger it is by adding a gate to it that's triggered from the kick track. So let's add a gate here. Set up for sidechain right here. And right now, it's not going to play at all. So now we need to send from our kick drum to this gate. let's open up our sends and send to a new track. Now I'm only sending to a new track because it's a quick way of making a new send. I'm going to delete the track afterwards. It's kind of a shortcut I use. So go new track, mono, aux input, and we'll name it sidechain. And that creates a new track here that's being sent from here. But like I said, we don't really need the track, so I'll delete it. But create a new send that's already named. We'll send it out pre-fader, full volume, or 0 dB. This way, where we set this volume isn't really going to matter. The gate's going to work the same way as far as triggering, regardless of where the fader is, which is important. So now we'll go back here and bring the volume up a bit and adjust our gate, which is now triggering from our kick drum. Move this over a bit. We'll set our sidechain over here to that bus, sidechain, and now let's adjust the threshold. Notice it only comes through when the kick is playing. Then we can adjust the range to be completely closed and the ratio be as high as possible. This way it's going to turn on or off, nothing in between. Then we can adjust our attack, our release, and the hold to create how long the note is. The longer the hold or release is, the longer the note. And the attack decides how quickly it comes in. If you make it too quick, it adds a click to it. Let's see if we need that. No, that sounds terrible. We don't need that. Let's adjust the hold. To make the note nice and long, and the release decides how it fades out at the end. If it's quick, there's a click at the end. This sounds smoother. That feels pretty good. Now let's mix it with the real kick. It's a nice effect. Let's see how it sounds with the rest of the drums. Now, one more thing we should check before moving on. Let's turn the tone off. Go back to our EQ. Let's make sure the phase of the kick drum works with the overheads and the room. I'm not hearing a big difference, so let's leave it not inverted. Before and after. That feels pretty good. Let's go with this for now, and let's move on. Next, we're going to work on the snare. Let's hear it. Now, the first thing I'm noticing is the snare close mic isn't doing a whole lot. A lot of the sound is coming from the overheads and the room mic. But the close mic snare is adding a bit of presence, which I kind of like. It just brings the snare drum a little more in our face. So let's treat it a little bit to bring that out. We'll start with the EQ that used to be on the 2 bus. And let's start over. Clear it out. It's definitely too dark. So let's make it brighter with a top-end shelving EQ. Now again, a shelving EQ boosts from the frequency, let's say this one here, all the way up, where a parametric EQ just boosts the frequency that we choose. It doesn't go all the way up, all the way down, which is what a shelving EQ does. From here, all the way up. And it makes it sound more natural and a bit prettier. So let's try adding that to the snare drum. Let's bring the frequency down a bit. Without. Much better. But now the snare drum sounds a bit thin. So we could boost the low end or the lower mid-range to make it sound deeper or more meaty with some weight to it. For this, we'll use a parametric EQ because I don't want to boost with a shelving EQ all the way down. I try to find the frequency that fills it out the best. Before and after. That sounds better to me. Let's hear it with the rest of the drums. I'm hearing something a bit weird. Let's check the phase of this mic against the others. Notice how much deeper it sounds when the phase or polarity is inverted. It's much deeper. 4. That sounds better to me. So I think the snare track is good for now. Let's move on, and we'll add all the drums to a drum bus. Next, we're going to create a drum bus and add some parallel compression to our drums. Let's start off by making a drum bus. Let's see what we have now. So let's take all these drums and bus it to their own channel, or their own aux. So select them all. On Mac, hold on Option-Shift. On PC, hold on Alt-Shift, and select it, and choose New Track. We'll make a stereo aux input, and we'll name it Drum Bus. Let's give it a different color so it stands out. A little brighter green. Now this is our drum bus. All these drums are going here. So that's useful for a few different things. First of all, we could adjust our drums with one fader, just bringing it up and down, instead of moving all the individual tracks or creating a group. Another thing it does, we can add processing to all our drums at once. So if we want to add an EQ, just go here, and we have an EQ for the entire drum set. I don't think we need that right now, so let's get rid of it. But another thing we could do is compress our drums with one compressor, so they glue together as one unit. Let's do it with a limiter. Let's use the preset we put on the room mics. Hold on Option on the Mac, Alt on the PC, and just drag it over. So now, not only is this multi-band compressor on the room mics, it's also on the whole kit, right here. So let's adjust it to taste. Bring the threshold down. Bring the output down a bit. It glues the drums together and gets them to pump really nicely, but it's a little bit too much. It kills all the transients. So a great way to minimize the effect while still getting this glue or this compression is to create a parallel bus. So let's close this. And I should show you this first. Right now this bus isn't solo safed. So if we solo our room mics, we don't hear the drums or the overheads. Because in this situation, we have to solo the bus as well in order to hear them. But you could solo safe it so you don't have to do that in the future. On the Mac, you hold on Command. On the PC, hold on Control and click it, and it grays out. So now I could solo the kick drum. I'm just hearing the kick drum, but I'm also hearing it come through the bus, which is important for this stuff. So now we want to create a parallel bus to minimize the effect of that compression or the heavy limiting. So let's select it and duplicate it. Let's name the second bus Crush. And let's bypass the first one. So this is how the drum sounded before. Very natural with all the transients, but it's not as compressed and it's not as glued. This one has all the compression on it, or heavy limiting. But again, it's too much. So we could bring this down and mix them in so that we still get our transients from this track, but that cool sound and compression from this one. Notice how it retains all the transients that are lost when we listen right here. So we're getting the best of both worlds, and we can mix this to taste. The more transients, or the more natural we want the drums to sound, we use more of this one. The more compressed, or affected, or more crushed, just add more of this. To me, that sounds a lot better than just the plain drums on their own. So let's go with this, and let's move on. Next, we're going to work on the bass track. Let's start off by hearing it. Now, the first thing I'm noticing, it's not very clear sounding. It's kind of muddy, not a lot of definition to it. So to smooth out the performance, let's start off by adding some compression. But let's first check the EQ that we added already. This one. Let's check out taking this off. It's not really doing anything. And the top end, we probably don't need either. That's a little too high to affect the bass. The bass is more down here. But either way, I don't think we need to boost that. I have a few other ideas. So let's take this off completely. And instead, let's add a compressor. We'll use a ratio of about 3:1, and let's hear what this sounds like. We'll adjust the attack and release. A faster attack grabs a little quicker, and a faster release will bounce back quicker from note to note. That's a pretty good amount. As you can see here, this is what's being reduced. Let's add some makeup gain to make up for what we're reducing. It's a bit louder because of the makeup gain, but it's also more even. So this feels pretty good for now, but it's still not cutting through very much. Let's hear it in the track. It's better and more even. Let's try a few other options. One of the things I like to do is duplicate the bass track and put some other effects on it, and then blend them together. Let's try that. We'll duplicate this one. Let's mute the first one. And let's try adding a plugin called Bass Amp Room. It's made by Softtube, and it emulates the sound of using a real bass amp. Let's hear it. Using different cabinets and different mic choices, and even mic placement, you can move it around. Let's check out the presets. I think I'm liking this one. Clean Fat 1. Makes the bass sound a bit rounder. Let's hear it with the original track mixed in. It's a bit subtle, but it does round it out nicely. And we should always, when we're doing this, check the phase or polarity. We do that right here. On the plugin, there's a phase invert button. Make sure we find the better position for it. I'm not hearing a big difference, and I think it's because this is set to mostly DI, less amplifier, so it's probably not being affected by it. Either way, it sounds good here. But you always need to check that when you're combining bass tracks. Otherwise, it could sound like this. See how hollow that sounds? So always check that when combining bass tracks. So let's hear this in the track. That's feeling pretty good. Let's rename this track Bass Room. And let's also duplicate the track again. The first one. Again, we'll mute the first two. Now the reason for this, I want to try one other plugin on there, just so I can see if I can get some more definition out of the bass by adding some distortion. Let's solo this track. Again, right now it's exactly the same as the first track, the DI. So let's put a plugin on there. I'm going to choose the Sans amp. Let's check out some presets. That's a bit too much. Let's hear this one. That's even more. Let's try this one. Notice you can hear more definition as the distortion brings up the mid-range. Now let's hear this mixed with the other tracks. Notice how it brings out the notes? Let's hear in the track. Without it, the bass sounds a bit distant. Behind the speakers, with it, it sounds more in front, in our face, so you can really hear what the bass player is playing, but it still has the roundness from the other two tracks. Before, it's pretty hard to hear. Not much definition. After, much better. So let's go with this for now, and let's move on. Next, we're going to work on the guitar rhythm right here, because it starts off the song. Unmute it. Let's hear it. Now, if you notice, it only plays in the intro and then over here. Doesn't play in the rest of the song. So we can focus on just those sections. Let's solo it. I can tell right away this is not played through an amp. It sounds like it's recorded direct, plugged from the guitar right into the computer. Doesn't have much tone to it, and it sounds a little plasticky. So I'd like to try to do, rather than worrying about EQ or compression, is add an amplifier to this, or a cabinet simulator. So let's bypass this plugin, and let's try a few out. We could use the Sans amp again. Or we could use Vintage Amp Room by Softtube. But there's another one I've been checking out lately, and it's part of Easy Mix 2 by TuneTrack. Which is a plugin designed to mix your whole song by using presets on each track. But it just so happens it has a really good amplifier simulator. choose guitars. These are filters. Amp and cabinet. I'm going to choose the preset pack, Classic Amps, which is designed just for recreating amplifiers. And there's a bunch of presets to choose from. So let's hear them. Notice how dramatically we could change the sound compared to this. It sounds much more interesting going through the amp simulators. I think I preferred the first one. 15-watt vintage. And we can play with some parameters right down here. But one of the things I like to do with this is adjust the input to change the amount of gain being added. It's a little too distorted. Before, that's pretty weak. Not so good. But it still sounds a bit dry to me. Let's add some reverb to this. Let's close it. Go to our sends. Let's create a new send here. New track. We'll name it guitar verb and make it mono. That makes a new track here, which is an effects return. We'll solo safe it. And we'll put a plugin on there to create some reverb. Let's choose Air Spring Reverb. And it's a mono reverb. Let's choose a preset. Let's find one. And give it some signal. It's a little too long. That's better. Let's hear another. That's way too long. Let's go back to this one. Just a bit. Before and after. Much better. Just to give it some ambience to it. It's also a very vintage sounding effect, like a spring reverb that's built into the amp. But I still think it could cut a bit more. So let's add some EQ to it. We'll get rid of this one and start over. I want to add some upper mid-range to make it a bit brighter, so it cuts more. Before, after. Turn the track. Let's hear in the next section. Nice. That sounds a lot better to me. And it's a more interesting intro for the song. Before and after. It sounds like the guitar is played to a vintage amp. Let's take the effects return over here. Let's give it its own color. I like to use yellow for effects returns, just so I know what they are. Let's put it at the end, after the master fader, just so they're out of the way. Let's hear this again. Sounds pretty good to me. So let's move on and do the next track. Next, we're going to check out the guitar head track right here that plays along with the sax. Let's hear it. Let's hear it with the sax as they play in the same part. Together. Now, like the last guitar track, this is also recorded direct. It has no amp sound to it, so it has no depth or interest to the sound. It's just a very clean, plasticky sounding guitar. So like the last track, let's add a simulated cabinet to the track. Once again with this, let's bypass it for now. We'll get back to it later. And once again, we'll try Easy Mix 2. We'll go to our preset pack and choose Classic Amps. Let's check out the presets. I think I like either this one or this one. Let's hear in the track with the sax off. Before. But it definitely has too much reverb and can have a little more gain to it. Let's turn this off, the reverb, and let's play with the drive. Right about there feels pretty good. Now let's add just a bit of reverb. Before, after. Let's hear it with the sax. That feels pretty good. But to control the performance, let's compress it a bit. After this plugin, let's put a compressor on the track. And let's compress it a bit to keep the level more contained. Just a bit. We'll make the attack a bit quicker and the release quicker, so it sounds a little more aggressive. Before, sounds pretty good. Now let's add some EQ to it, just to make it bite a bit more. We'll start over. And we'll use a parametric or peaking EQ just to center on the most important frequency, mostly in the upper mid-range. Right about there, but that's a bit too much. Before? That's a little warmer. That's a little too abrasive. Let's bring it back a bit. And let's also make the peak a little wider. Before. Just a bit, so it cuts through the track a little better, but still sounds warm. I don't want it to sound too thin. Before. And after. That sounds much better. It sounds like more of a guitar amp with the depth and cabinet sound, and it mixes nicely with the sax. So let's go with this for now, and check out the sax to go with it. Let's go. Next, we're going to check out the saxophone, which pretty much plays the same part as the guitar head track. Let's hear it. Now for this, I want to keep it pretty natural. I don't want to do too much EQ or make it sound too aggressive, but we could make the part a little tighter by adding a bit of compression. So let's start with that. We'll keep the ratio 3:1, make the attack and release a little quicker, and play with the threshold. That'll just keep the performance very even. Before, it's subtle, but it's effective. As far as EQ, we have this on there now. Let's hear it bypassed. It's a bit darker, but it does cut. So let's turn off the EQ and hear how it sounds on the track without it. Against the other guitar. I think it cuts quite nicely without any EQ. Let's add some reverb to it to make it sound more spacey. Let's open up our sends. Let's create a new one right here. Mono, and we'll call it saxoverb. Just so we know it's for the sax. We'll solo safe the return, and we'll add a plugin for reverb. Let's choose the deverb. But we're going to choose mono to stereo. So I have a mono send, but a stereo return. So the effect is in stereo. Let's hear a few presets. I'm thinking of a plate. And let's send it some signal. That's a little too bright. Let's try this one. That feels pretty good. It's not going to take up too much room or be too obvious. We just want to hear the effect being subtle, so we don't need it to be too bright. Let's hear that in the track. That feels pretty good. We can hear the saxophone very clearly and separate from the other guitar, and they each have their own space. But there is one thing I'm noticing. Later on in the song, about here, the saxophone plays by itself. The guitar over here comes in. But the sax takes over as the lead instrument. So for that spot, I want to treat the saxophone a bit differently. And the easiest way of doing that is putting it on its own track. So let's duplicate this track. We'll name it Sax 2. And let's separate its part on each section. Get rid of this one. And when it's not playing with the guitar, like right here, let's cut it and put it on the sax number 2 track. And the same with the ending. So I could treat it differently when it's not playing off of the other guitar. So right now, it's treated exactly the same. Same compression, same reverb. But let's pan it in the middle. Because it's not playing off the other guitar. Let's pan left. So by itself, we'll keep it in the middle. Because it's the lead right there. And let's give it a bit more reverb. It's more of a spacious part. And to make it bite more, let's add some different EQ to this one. We'll boost a little upper mid-range. Just a bit. Before. And after. It just cuts a bit more. And also for this section, this sax can be a bit more spacey. So let's make it that way by adding a delay to it. But just to this one. Go to our sends and make a new one. Mono, aux input. And let's name it delay left. You'll see why in a bit. Again, we'll solo safe this one. Put a delay plugin on there. Mod delay 3. And we want this to be in time with the song. Right now, the song doesn't have a tempo. We could change that just by tapping it in right over here. In Pro Tools, by hitting the key T over and over again in time with the song, it'll analyze the tempo. And it doesn't need to be perfect, just pretty close for the song. About there feels pretty good. 133 beats per minute. So now, we could set our delay time to quarter notes. And let's put a low pass filter at about 8 or 9 kilohertz, just to roll off the top end. Let's send it some signal. Let's pan this delay to the left. Let's make another delay and pan to the right. And we'll send it from the first delay. Delay left, new track, mono, delay right. We'll pan this to the right, put the same effect on there. And let's send some signal from the left delay going to the right delay. So it pans back and forth, but it still stops. There's no feedback. We can create feedback by going to the second delay and sending it back to the first delay. Delay left. And it's in time with the song. Turn the track. a pretty cool effect. And to make it sound even more distant, let's put some reverb, a saxoverb, on here as well. On the returns, so they sound more spacious. Return the track. That works quite nicely. Now let's hear the transition from sax 1 to sax 2. That works nicely. Each section sounds a bit different, and they're treated separately. So I think we're good on the sax. Let's take our returns, change their color, and move them over. Once again, so they're out of our way. All the effects returns are on this side of the master fader, and the color the same. So let's move on. Next, I want to check out the guitar chords that play during the second sax section, right over here. They're recorded in stereo with some kind of chorus effect. And the first thing I want to do is pan them over a bit so they're not in the center, fighting with the sax. So let's take the right channel and move it closer to the left. That'll give the sax some room in the center. Let's stop by muting the EQ. In fact, let's just turn it off and start over. Let's get rid of some mud by cutting some low and mid-range frequencies. Before, after. It just takes out some of the extra mud that we don't need, that kills the clarity of the track. Now let's boost some higher mid-range frequencies. Before, it's a bit muddy. Now to tighten up that performance, let's compress it a bit. But normally when I compress things, I like to use my cut EQ before the compressor and my boost EQ after the compressor. This way with the lower mid-range here is not going to affect the compressor because it's cut before it. But the stuff over here, I want to put it after the compressor. This way we're not fighting it. So the way to do that is just duplicate it. Take the first one and remove the upper mid-range boosting EQ and go to the second one and remove the lower mid-range cut like this. So we're still doing the same thing, cutting down here and boosting here, but we're going to compress in the middle. We'll use 3-to-1. Let's put it at the threshold. Before, after. It just evens out the dynamics a bit, so we can play it back lower in the track and still hear it. Let's hear it in the track. Before, it's a little cloudy. After, it's much clearer, but it's a little dry. So let's add some reverb to it. We use the guitar reverb, which is the same reverb on the guitar rhythm track right here. The one that starts off the song. Just a bit, so it doesn't sound too dry. Let's hit it with the sax. That sounds pretty good. It plays again a little bit later, but I think it's the same part. Let's leave it like this for now, and let's move on. Next, we're going to check out the guitar solo. Let's hear it. Now, just like some of the other guitars, this guitar was recorded direct, so it also has a bit of that plasticky sound. So let's try adding an amp simulator to this track. Let's try Easy Mix again. We'll go to Guitars, Amplifiers and Cabinets, and let's hear what this does. Let's hear this one in the track. I like the depth it adds, but it's a bit too distorted. So let's lower the input on this preset. I think I like what this is doing, but there's something really interesting about the top end when it's bypassed. That we're not getting when the plugin's on there. So to preserve this, I'm going to mult this track and mix the two together. So let's duplicate this. And let's take the Easy Mix 2 plugin off the second one, and we'll name it Guitar Solo 2. So now we can blend the effect and the non-effect to get the best of both worlds. But something weird's happening. I think they're out of phase. So let's go to our EQ and flip the polarity right here. That sounds better. Before, that's much better. Now let's take these EQs and start over. But I think I like the top end on the direct track, so let's bring it back up. The blend sounds pretty good. We're getting a better tone from this track, but some nice top end from this track. Now let's try adding some effects to make the solo sound more spacey. Let's start off with reverb, make a new track, mono, we'll call it solo verb. And again, we'll solo safe it. Put a reverb plugin on there. We'll use deverb, mono to stereo. And once again, let's check out the plates. Too short. That feels pretty good. Turn the track. That feels pretty good. Before. But I think we could also use some delay. So let's add that ping pong delay we created before. Delay left. And let's hear this. Sounds pretty good. We get the best of both worlds with an amp simulator on this track and the original direct track over here. So we can blend it for the mix and even change it up for different parts of the solo. But for now, let's go with this and let's move on. And finally, let's check out the Fender Rhodes. So basically, the part pokes out in different spots, playing these staccato lines. So to make the part more even or more controlled, let's start by adding a compressor. Let's make the attack a bit quicker and the release, just so it grabs more. We'll adjust the makeup gain. It just makes the part more even so we can automate it less, as each note is poking out about the same amount. Let's check out the EQ. I think it can be brighter, but not necessarily this way. So let's turn this off and start again. And let's bring up the upper mid-range so it bites more. Now let's add a bit of reverb to make it sound more ambient and sit back in the track. Let's create a unique one just for the Rhodes. New track, mono, we'll name it Rhodes Verb. We'll solo safe it. And let's use a spring reverb on this one. Down here, spring reverb, mono to stereo. This one's made by Softtube. Let's hear what it sounds like. Send it some signal. Let's make it fully wet. That's a bit too much reverb. Let's bring down the send. Just a bit. That feels good. Now before we finish this, the artist that made this requested we add an effect to the end of the song to make it sound more psychedelic by using a delay, like a rolling space echo or a tape delay, to have it feedback a lot and create some psychedelic effects. So let's try to do that. Let's go to the end of the song. Right over here. Right in this section, using the Rhodes. So what I'm going to do is split this part to two separate tracks and treat the ending separately. So let's duplicate it. Let's cut the second track before that last note and the first track a bit after it. This way the normal track hangs over and the delayed track or affected track continues on. So let's treat this a bit differently. Name it Rhodes 2. And let's start by adding a tube delay to it. On the delay, also made by Softtube, is this tube delay, which can get pretty trippy. Let's put the mix fully wet. Let's bring up the drive so it distorts a bit, has some gain to it. And let's play with the delay time and the feedback to find a cool setting. Let's add some more effects to this track. Let's boost the Rhodes Verb. Let's add a delay. The panning one. And a bit more reverb. Let's use the solo verb. It's on the guitar solo. Something like that. Next, I want to automate it so the delay time or delay length changes over time, which will create some pitch effects. Something like that. So we should automate it by going over here and choosing delay time and add it to our plugin automation. Now I'm going to draw this in just so it's perfect. So it'll move very gradually. So it'll start about here and it'll end about over here. And we'll bring it up so it gradually gets longer. Let's hear that. Now, the way it's set up now, it's going to feedback forever and a little too long. So let's automate the feedback as well. Choose feedback and hit add. Now this one, I'll automate by hand. Go into touch mode, go to automation enable, and switch it to make sure we're recording plugin automation. So now I can hit play and automate the feedback, and it'll be recorded just as we do it. Pretty cool. Let's see what we did right here. And let's fade out the ending. Just so it doesn't get too noisy at the end. The transition will be smoother. Let's hear this back. That sounds a lot better. It's now ready for the final stage where we mix it down and automate each track. Let's move on. So the next step in mixing this is to automate each track. But before we get to this step, I sent a rough mix to the client or the artist to get their opinion of where we are. And the biggest feedback I got from it is that it sounds great, but it's a bit too aggressive as far as the 2-bus compression and the drums. Everything is clear and clean, but it's pumping a little bit too much. They prefer it to sound a bit more natural, which is okay. It makes sense for this genre. And also, the effect on the Rhodes at the end is a bit too loud. So we're going to make that a little more subtle as well. So let's see how to approach that before we automate this. So let's start off with the 2-bus compression. Let's turn off the multiband, and let's check out the regular compressor. Right now our threshold is about -7. Let's see what it's doing. Let's try bringing that back about half as much. That's a bit more subtle. Next, we go to the multiband. Put it back on. This is also doing a bit too much. It's making it sound very processed and crunchy. So let's pull this back as well. Right now, each band is set to -6. Let's try bringing that back. That's better. Let's type these in, just so they're all the same. It still gives an improvement, but it's not as aggressive. So now let's work on the drums. Let's mute all the other tracks. The other thing that's making the drum sound aggressive is our crush bus. Let's bring the mix of the crush bus versus the direct bus down a bit. It still improves it, but it's a bit more subtle. Before, now let's hit it with the whole track. It's not nearly as aggressive, and it's a lot more natural sounding, not so processed. So let's go ahead and start automating the tracks. We'll start with the intro guitar, right here, the guitar rhythm. We'll put it into touch mode. Check out automation mode, and make sure volume is turned on. Now we can automate this track. And we can see the results right here. These are the moves we made. We didn't do anything drastic, but even slight adjustments can mean a lot in the mix. So let's move on to the guitar head and the sax. Again, I'll put it in touch mode. Let's turn off the sax for now, just so we can hear this a bit clearer. And let's ride it. Just so it's a bit above the track. We don't want it too loud. We want to keep room for the sax. Now let's do the sax. Turn it back on. Put it in touch mode. And do the same thing. And this is what it looks like. Let's move on to the second sax over here. Touch mode. Now, if you notice at the end, I pulled it down. That's because I want to create an effect where the sax moves away. And the way to do that is by bringing it down and then bringing up the effects. So let's automate the effects on this last line. Go to the reverb, and we're in touch mode, but go to automation enable and turn on send volume. So we can automate the send as well. So I'm going to bring up the reverb and delay right here. And the delay. It creates an interesting effect. There's the reverb, and there's the delay. Now let's do the guitar solo. And if you remember, we have two tracks here. Go to the mix window. We have two tracks here. One with an amp simulator and one that's direct. And we like to balance the way it's set up right now. We want to ride them together. So the way to do that is by grouping them. So let's select them both. Choose group. We'll name it solo. Now they'll work together. Now let's ride those. And the only thing I'm not liking about that is at the end, it got a bit too crunchy. Right about there. So I'm going to turn off the group. Right over here. I'm going to automate them separately. I'm going to bring the amp sound down. So we hear more of the direct sound, and then we'll bring the direct up. But I'm not liking that last note, so let's automate that by drawing it in. Right here. Go to the line tool, just fade it out here. I like that better. A little cleaner at the end. It makes room for a sax solo here. So let's jump to the end and work on the Rhodes. Right here. And again, we're going to bring this down from where it was, so it's not nearly as loud. And it looks like this, and it's a lot more subtle. So that's pretty much it. I'll probably go back and tweak a few more things, but I think you get the idea. So now in the next video, I'm just going to run the final mix without stopping, just so you have it as a reference. But for now, this was mixing a jazz fusion song. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.